And now we'll hear from Jennifer Park, who is from the Office of Management and Budget. Jennifer.
Thank you. Usually at these sorts of talks, folks say, well, why is someone from the budget going to come and talk to me about science and statistics? I don't understand. You can't hear. Is this better? Okay. So often, why is a nice girl from the budget coming to speak to me about statistics and science? And I work for the Office of the Chief Statistician, Catherine Wallman, who could not be here today. But I'm very glad to tell you about our involvement with the Sustainable Development Goals and our colleagues in the State Department, USAID, throughout the U.S. government, and our colleagues in the UN Statistical Commission as we are working together to monitor progress against these goals. So I thought that I would start with the main points in case I started telling stories and ran out of time. But in a nutshell, this is where we're at. The Statistical Commission was asked by UNGA in September of last year to identify indicators for measurement of progress against the goals and targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the 17 goals have been identified for you. There are 169 targets, and why we quibble about indicators and targets is the indicators are what we would be using to monitor progress across countries on a global level on a regular basis. And currently that number is about 235, and it's going to increase. So we have to deliver this set of indicators by March 2016, and yes, that's in a few weeks. In New York. The Statistical Commission said, okay, well, how do we do this? We'll form some committees, because that's what we do. And they created two. The first is the Interagency Expert Group, and the United States is an observer to that activity. We work closely with Canada on that activity, and that group was tasked with trying to figure out how to measure progress against these targets, right? Where do we start? And in fact, the IAEG has delivered a framework set of indicators. I'll tell you a little bit about it, but it's still a deliberative process. You'll appreciate until the last possible minute there are going to be some changes here or there. But I think it's important to manage expectations about what the framework of indicators is and what it's not, and what it will allow the scientific community in particular to think about over the next 15 years. It's really a framework. It's a starting point, and like any other aspect of science that's robust, it's going to be constantly evaluated over time. It doesn't mean that it's not a good starting point. It's saying this is the best that we can reach consensus on at this moment. This is identifying the areas where we need further methodological work. This is identifying areas where we don't have any data yet. We have to figure out how to obtain them. And we have to continually revise and reassess if, for example, we're getting any variation on these indicators from a statistical standpoint. If we're not seeing any variation, then our indicator is probably not very good. We need to go back and revisit that. But that's okay, because that's good science. So that framework that's being delivered is not a final set, we figured it out, this is what you have to measure progress on. This is where we are today. Now, that framework is going to identify areas where consensus has been reached and areas for further methodological development and areas where data are still required. There's a second committee that the UN Statistical Commission has established, the high-level group. It's a very long name, but all you need to know is the high-level group, one of many high-level groups, that is meant to focus on identifying capacity building. Statistical capacity building, identifying ways to use big data to produce official statistics, to enable national statistical offices to produce data, and to educate their publics about how to use those data and how to access those data. And I think an underlying point is it's not just that we're achieving the SDGs or working toward that, which is obviously fundamental, but it's all the things that we're doing in order to monitor our progress that is also lifting up the scientific community, lifting up the statistical community. As we figure out ways to measure, how we figure out ways to better work with big data and figure out what is most important to measure, we're lifting up the scientific field as well. So that's very exciting for me. So now I'll go into the details since I have a moment or two. So just as a reminder, for those of you who are not familiar, the Statistical Commission was tasked with selecting the indicators. It was very important that that process remain a technical process. And the Statistical Commission has a very long-established tradition of being separate from the more policy-oriented discussions within the UN. And so it's been working through that process. And this is a way that the United States government has interfaced with that process. If you bear with me, I know it's quite a graph there, but if you want to understand or orient yourself to where the indicators are being developed through what device, it's that purple box in the middle with the big circle around it, right? And the interagency expert group has been meeting, and the United States government has been contributing to that indirectly because we're not a member, we're an observer, but we communicate through our colleague in Canada. We have a very strong relationship with them. And to collect our comments from the U.S. public, we have been working closely with the State Department. There are about 13 working groups that we've been consulting. We have 127 federal statistical programs in the United States. And so we've been consulting with them as well, and we've enjoyed a very robust relationship with the National Academy as well, especially the Committee on National Statistics. So this consultation process has been going on for the past year regarding the selection of indicators. There's been 3 open consultations, and to me, I think this is really amazing if you think about it. Anybody from civil society could submit a comment, a proposal to the Statistical Directorate for the Commission to have their voices heard. And during the meetings of the IAEG, we actually heard from civil society. They gave presentations. It was a very open and interactive experience. There were also 5 separate members-only consultations, sometimes including observer, national statistical offices. I will tell you, I am a formidable ambassador from the United States on these sessions because they're so exciting. I can't help but not say a lot and be very engaged. But it's a very robust conversation. And as a result, what we're going to be delivering, or the IAEG will be delivering, is something like this. But it's not going to be in this form. What does this mean? The mandate for the Statistical Commission was to produce at least one indicator for each of the 169 targets. They were not meant to reinterpret any particular target or give any greater priority to one goal or target versus another. In some cases, you will see that there are more indicators that have been specified for some goals than others. The color green here indicates that consensus among the members of the IAG has been reached for that number of indicators. The gray area indicates where further discussion is ongoing, and it's not likely that by March we'll be able to say that we've reached consensus in that area. The color designation has nothing to do with the robustness of the measure or the availability of data. This is just reflecting agreement, which is still an achievement. But that doesn't mean that we don't have some measures that we routinely collect and we can make publicly available very quickly. But it does point out a couple of things, and I think my colleagues have mentioned this as well. There are some goals for which we, at least in the United States and across the world, probably in many UN regions, where we more routinely collect these measures. We understand how they function. We can say that they are robust. And those are the lower order goals, if you will, the ones under, let's say, Goal 8. But it's at the farther reaching of this very ambitious Sustainable Development Goal agenda where we have a lot of work to do to reach consensus yet. And I would say also to make sure that we have proposed enough indicators to fully reflect the intended scope of the target. That is not uniformly the case at the moment. So we are working on that. Last point. So again, I'd like us to think about this indicator set that is being developed as a framework. We have 235 that are most likely going to be presented to the Statistical Commission. The Statistical Commission will be asked to support the process that was used to identify these indicators and to agree with the proposal for further development of indicators either that require methodological development and or need routine data collection. And there are still some areas where consensus has not been reached. The United Nations Statistical Commission has a series of working groups that they have traditionally used through, that assign tiers of required level of effort. And we're going to use that same process to lift up measurement for the Sustainable Development Goal indicators. But data gaps are something that we're going to have to work with, and we can not only rely on official data collections to do so. And that concludes my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy.